system failure, patient deteriorated, code blue called, no response. The words hung in the cold air of the Meridian Medical Center's emergency simulation bay like smoke that wouldn't clear. Dr. Colette Beaupre slammed her tablet face down on the console table. That's the 4th run this week. 4 times in a row, the diagnostic AI has locked us out of the override sequence and the patient model dies on the table. It's not a glitch, it's a pattern. Across the room, Chief of Medicine Dr. Franklin Osee pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose and exhaled through his teeth. He was 58 years old and had spent the last 14 of those years building the hospital's AI-assisted diagnostic program from a pilot project into the most ambitious triage system in the country. Watching it fail again in front of him felt like watching a house he built with his own hands quietly catch fire. "It's not a pattern, Beaupre," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. "It's a calibration issue. The ELIAS system is still learning the parameters of our specific patient population. We adjusted the Edmonton protocol last month. It needs time to recalibrate." 4 deaths, Colette Beaupre said, and she didn't yell it. She said it the way you say something you've been holding in your chest for days, flat and precise, like setting a stone on a table. 4 simulated deaths, Dr. Osee. The Regional Health Board is arriving in 4 hours. If we can't demonstrate that ELIAS can triage a multi-system trauma case without locking the attending physicians out of the override controls, they will pull our funding. They will pull the entire program. And then what happens to the 12 rural clinics that are depending on remote ELIAS triage because they don't have the staff to cover overnight shifts? The room went quiet after that. There were 6 people in the simulation bay. 2 residents, a biomedical technician named Patrice Desrosiers, Beaupre, Osee, and a software consultant who had flown in from Montreal the previous morning and had spent most of the last 20 hours staring at lines of code on a screen the color of old paper. His name was Sébastien Morel, and he was 29 years old, and he had graduated top of his class. And right now he was rubbing his eyes with the heels of both hands because he could not find the error. "There's nothing wrong with the code," Morel said, mostly to himself. "The decision tree is structurally sound. The ELIAS system is making the correct call given its inputs. It's prioritizing what it's been told to prioritize. The problem isn't the AI. The problem is that the AI doesn't know what it doesn't know." Nobody answered him. It was the kind of statement that sounds profound until you realize it doesn't actually solve anything. In the far corner of the simulation bay, near the supply closet that nobody ever opened, because it contained 12 years of outdated hardware that nobody had gotten around to disposing of, a man in green coveralls was replacing a fluorescent tube in the overhead light fixture. He was working from a 2-step ladder, slowly and carefully, the way a person moves when their knees have had a long conversation with time and lost. He was 74 years old. His name was Raymond Sear, and the name tag stitched above his left breast pocket said maintenance in letters that had faded from white to the color of old cream. He had been working at Meridian for 6 years, ever since he moved back to the area to be closer to his daughter and her family after his wife, Paulette, passed. Before that, he had lived in a small house in Petawawa, Ontario, for reasons he didn't generally discuss, and before Petawawa he had been other places for other reasons that he discussed even less. The residents hadn't looked at him once. Morel hadn't looked at him. Beaupre glanced at him once, briefly, the way you glance at a lamp you've always assumed works. Raymond finished seating the fluorescent tube, stepped down off the ladder 1 rung at a time, and folded it quietly. He picked up the dead bulb to carry it to the waste bin. He stopped. He looked at the simulation screen. The frozen holographic display showed the last failed run, a 37-year-old male presenting with blunt chest trauma, suspected tension pneumothorax, secondary presentation of traumatic brain injury. The ELIAS system had correctly identified both injuries. It had locked into its pneumothorax protocol, and when the attending physician attempted to initiate concurrent TBI management, managing both conditions simultaneously rather than sequentially, the system had blocked the override because its training data indicated that concurrent intervention in these 2 conditions produced worse average outcomes. The average was wrong, Raymond thought. Not the math, the average. He knew the difference. He set the dead bulb on the edge of a cart. He picked up his ladder and walked toward the door. "That sequencing is backwards," he said. It was quiet, the way a comment can be quiet when the person making it isn't looking for a reaction. He said it the way you say something to the room when you're not sure the room is listening. Dr. Beaupre turned around. "Excuse me?" Raymond paused at the door. He turned halfway. "The system is managing the pneumothorax first, then the TBI." He gestured with the folded ladder once, a small motion in the direction of the screen. "But if the bleed is subdural and the pressure's already rising, you lose the window. By the time you've resolved the pneumo, the brain's been under pressure for 11-12 minutes. That's not recoverable. You have to run concurrent management, or you're not actually treating the patient. You're just completing a sequence." Sebastien Morel stared at him. "That's what the code says," the consultant said slowly. "The data indicates sequential management produces better aggregate outcomes." Raymond shook his head, not unkindly. "That data is from 2009. Before the updated ATLS guidelines, the concurrent protocol has been standard of care for dual presentation trauma since 2014. Dr. Beaupre looked at Dr. Osei. Dr. Osei looked at the maintenance man in the green coveralls. Patrice Desrogiers, the biomedical technician, cleared his throat. "Sir, this is a classified simulation environment. There's restricted access." "He has a clearance pass," Dr. Osei said, more out of reflex than anything else. "He has one. We vetted everyone on the facilities list." "Who are you?" Beaupre asked. Not rudely, but honestly. She genuinely didn't know. "Raymond Sear, ma'am. I do the lights." Beaupre looked at the screen. She looked back at him. "You said 2014. The updated ATLS guidelines, Advanced Trauma Life Support." "Yes, ma'am." "And you know the year they changed the concurrent protocol because I was on the committee that recommended the change," Raymond said. And then, as if that were a perfectly ordinary thing to have said, he turned back toward the door. "If you believe that some knowledge can't be downloaded, that it has to be lived, hit that like button. If you think there's someone in your life right now who's being overlooked, and they're holding something that matters, leave a comment that says 'still here,' because what happened next in that room was not about medicine. It was about the difference between data and wisdom, and it started with an old man who said 2 words and then tried to leave. The door didn't open, because Dr. Franklin Osei had crossed the room in 5 steps and put his hand flat against it. "Mr. Sear," he said, "I need you to stay." Raymond looked at the hand on the door. He looked at Osei. He had the kind of eyes that have seen too many things go wrong to be easily surprised, pale grey, steady like still water. "I have the East Corridor fluorescents to finish," Raymond said. "They can wait," Osei said, "please." Raymond stood there for a moment. He set the ladder down against the wall. He walked back toward the simulation table, slowly, hands in his coverall pockets. He looked at the frozen display. "Run it again," he said. Beaupre looked at Osei. Osei nodded once. She turned to the console. Resetting scenario. Dual presentation, blunt chest trauma with concurrent TBI indicators. 37-year-old male, hemodynamically unstable. The holographic table shimmered back to its starting state. The alias system initialized. Text scrolled across the secondary monitor. Trauma protocol initiated. Primary, tension pneumothorax. Initiating needle decompression sequence. Secondary TBI management. Queued. There, Raymond said, pointing. That word. Queued. Morel was at the keyboard now, leaning in. "Yeah, the system is queuing secondary management to begin after primary resolution. That's what I coded it to do." "Why?" "Because the aggregate outcome data." Raymond looked at him, not unkindly but very directly. How many of the patients in that aggregate data had a subdural bleed confirmed before intervention? How many were presenting with rising ICP at time of pneumo diagnosis? Morel opened his mouth, closed it. He turned to his laptop and started typing. Raymond leaned over the display. His finger traced the pathway the system had chosen. "The AI sees 2 problems," he said. "It assigns priority correctly. Pneumothorax is immediately life-threatening. But then it builds a queue. It assumes one problem must be resolved before the other can begin, and that assumption comes from the data it was trained on, which is data from a time before we understood that the delay itself was the cause of the secondary fatality. The AI is learning from outcomes that were already products of the wrong protocol. It's learning how to repeat the old mistake very efficiently." The room was very quiet. "He's right," Morel said. He was still staring at his screen. He sounded like a man who has just found the loose thread he's been looking for and is slightly horrified at where it leads. "The training data set. It's predominantly pre-2014. We pulled from the National Registry, and the registry wasn't filtered by protocol year. The alias system has been optimizing for an outcome model that's already been superseded. It's getting better and better at the old way." Dr. Beaupre sat down on the edge of the console table. She was a woman who had gone through her residency on 4 hours of sleep and 2 cups of weak hospital coffee, and she had learned not to show when something shook her, but she sat down slowly, and that said enough. "How?" she said very quietly. "Do we fix it?" Raymond straightened up. He pressed one hand to the small of his back, the way a person does when a certain kind of ache has been there long enough to be ignored most of the time, but not all of the time. "You need to retrain the concurrent protocol on post-2014 outcomes only," he said. "Filtered by confirmed dual presentation cases where ICP elevation was measured at time of pneumodiagnosis. Probably," his jaw moved slightly, he was calculating, "probably a dataset of 300-400 cases minimum. Filter out anything without full pre-intervention imaging. Then you need to rebuild the decision tree for the override sequence so that concurrent management isn't an exception that requires physician override. It should be the default pathway when both indicators are present above threshold." Morel was typing. "That's 8 hours of work," Morel said. Raymond nodded. "The board arrives in 4 hours, Beaupre said. Raymond looked at her. "I know," he said. "I set up the chairs in the main conference room this morning." A short silence. "Mr. Sear," Dr. Osi said carefully, "can I ask? The ATLS committee, when were you practicing?" Raymond looked at the display for a moment. The hologram was still frozen on the failed scenario, the patient model suspended in the amber of a stopped clock. "I was a trauma surgeon at Sunnybrook for 22 years, Raymond said. "Then I did 2 tours with Canadian Forces Health Services. Kandahar, 2006. Then Kabul. I came home in 2011. He paused. "I don't practice anymore." Osi stared at him. Beaupre stared at him. "Why not?" Beaupre asked, and she didn't mean it to come out the way it did, almost plaintive, like the question a child asks when something doesn't make sense. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "My hands, tremor. Started a couple of years after I came home." He held up his right hand briefly, and there it was, a fine, barely visible tremor, the kind that wouldn't matter in most things, but would matter in the only thing he'd spent his life being. He lowered his hand. "The tools change," he said. The knowledge didn't. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Dr. Osi cleared his throat. He was trying to think of something to say that was adequate, and finding that no such thing existed. So instead he said the only practical thing he could think of. "We don't have time to rebuild the dataset from scratch," he said, "but we can patch the decision tree for the demonstration. Sebastien, can you bypass the Q logic for the dual presentation pathway and hard-code the concurrent trigger for cases where ICP threshold is met?" Morel was already typing. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I can do that in 2, maybe 2.5 hours. It won't be perfect. It'll be a temporary fix. The permanent fix happens after the demonstration," Osi said. "We keep the board, we keep the funding, we have time to do this right." He turned to Raymond. "And that is only possible if you stay and help us." Raymond looked at the door. He looked at his folded ladder against the wall. "I have the east corridor," he said again, but with less conviction than before. "The east corridor," Dr. Beaupre said firmly, "will be very dark for one more afternoon." And she said it in a tone that left no room for the east corridor to argue. Raymond sat down in the chair that Desrosiers quietly pulled up for him, and for the next 2 hours and 47 minutes he stayed. What followed was not a dramatic montage of triumph. It was slow, painstaking, and punctuated by long silences during which Morel typed and Raymond watched the screen, and occasionally said things like the threshold parameter there is set for adult males averaging 85 kilograms. That's going to overtriage for female patients and undertriage for pediatric presentations. And Morel would type, and Beaupre would pull up the reference studies Raymond cited from memory, checking them against the actual literature, and every single time she found them exactly where he said they would be. At one point, Patrice Desrosiers brought Raymond a coffee without being asked. Raymond thanked him. Desrosiers stood there for a moment and then said, for no apparent reason, "My uncle was in Bosnia," and Raymond nodded once and said, "Good outfit." And Desrosiers nodded, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. The residents, who had been hovering near the back of the room saying very little, gradually moved closer. Not because they were asked to, but because they could feel, the way you can sometimes feel when something important is happening, that being in this room while this man talked was a different kind of education than anything they had received with letters attached to it. At 2 hours and 31 minutes, Morel sat back from his keyboard and exhaled a long, controlled breath. "Okay," he said, "it's patched. Dual presentation pathway now defaults to concurrent management when ICP indicators exceed threshold. Override lock is suspended for physician-initiated concurrent protocols. He looked at Raymond. Do you want to run it? Raymond looked at the display. He looked at O.C., who nodded. Run the scenario, Raymond said. Beaupre reset the simulation. The holographic table shimmered. The patient model initialized. 37-year-old male, blunt chest trauma, suspected tension pneumothorax, concurrent TBI indicators. Hemodynamically unstable. Trauma protocol initiated, the Elias system announced. Dual presentation confirmed. Concurrent management pathway initiated. Needle decompression sequence active. Concurrent ICP monitoring and intervention active. The simulation ran. The numbers moved. The physician interface remained unlocked throughout. At the 4-minute mark, the system flagged a secondary complication. Cardiac arrhythmia from the chest trauma, and prompted physician review rather than attempting to autonomously manage a third concurrent system. It was asking for help, Beaupre said softly. It flagged its own limitation and asked for human input. That's what it should do, Raymond said. When it encounters something outside its confident parameters, it should yield. It should know the edge of what it knows. At the 8-minute mark, the simulation concluded. Scenario complete, the Elias system announced. Patient stable. Outcome, favorable. Clinical rating, excellent. The word hung in the air. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. Desrosiers let out a long breath. The two residents looked at each other. Morel closed his laptop slowly. Beaupre put both hands flat on the console and stared at the screen. Dr. O.C. looked at Raymond. Raymond was already standing. He had picked up his ladder. Mr. Sear, O.C. began. Raymond shook his head, not sharply, just the way you wave off something you don't need. I didn't fix it, he said. He patched it. He nodded at Morel. You need to do the full rebuild. Post-2014 dataset. And you need to review every other protocol in that system for pre-cut-off training data. This won't be the only one. Morel was nodding. I know. I'll flag it in my report. Raymond picked up the dead fluorescent bulb from the cart where he'd left it. I'll be in the east corridor, he said. He got to the door this time. He pushed through it. The door swung closed behind him. The corridor outside was quieter than the simulation bay. The fluorescent fixture above the supply room at the far end had been flickering since Tuesday. He walked toward it, slowly, the way a person walks when they have already decided not to hurry. Behind him, through the closed door, he could hear Dr. O.C.'s voice. Pull his personnel file. I want to see it. Raymond kept walking. He already knew what the file would say, in the flat factual language that files use when they are trying to contain things too large for the page. Trauma Surgeon, Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, 1989-2011. Two tours. Canadian Forces, Health Services, Kandahar and Kabul. Multiple commendations. Order of Military Merit, 2009. Retired from clinical practice 2013. Current employer, Meridian Medical Center, Facilities Maintenance. He set up his ladder under the flickering light. What the file would not say was what those two tours looked like from the inside. What it was to perform surgery in a tent in 40-degree heat when the generator cut out and someone was holding a flashlight above your hands. What it was to come home and find that the hands that had been steady through all of that had finally quietly decided they had held on long enough. What it would not say was what the knowledge felt like when it was still in you, but the tools were gone, like being a cartographer who has gone blind. You still know every road, you can still describe every junction, you just can't draw the map anymore. He replaced the bulb. The corridor lit up steadily. He stepped down off the ladder. His radio crackled. It was Desrosiers. His voice was a little off, in the way voices go when someone is trying to sound normal and not quite managing it. Raymond, the board is here. Dr. O.C. wants you at the demonstration, he said. He said to tell you it's not a request. Raymond stood in the empty corridor for a moment. The light was good above him, steady and clear. He keyed the radio. Tell him I'll need 5 minutes to return the ladder to the storage room. There was a pause. Understood, Desrosiers said. I'll let him know. Raymond folded his ladder. He carried it to the storage room at the end of the corridor. He set it inside carefully. The way you set down something you've carried a long way. He closed the door. He smoothed the front of his green coveralls with both hands. The name above his pocket still said maintenance in letters the color of old cream. He walked back toward the simulation bay. The regional health board was 8 people, which was more than Raymond had expected. They were arranged in the chairs he had set up himself that morning, facing the holographic display table, and they had the settled, slightly skeptical expression of people who have heard many presentations and funded several of them and watched most of those not quite work out. Dr. O.C. stood at the head of the room. He saw Raymond in the doorway. He crossed to him. He lowered his voice. "I read your file," O.C. said. Raymond said nothing. "The Order of Military Merit," O.C. said. "The work in Kandahar. The trauma protocols you co-authored. Why didn't you? When we hired you for facilities, why didn't you?" "Because I came here to change light bulbs," Raymond said. O.C. stared at him for a moment. "Today you changed something more important than that," O.C. said. Raymond looked past him at the board members. He looked at the holographic display, reset and ready. He looked at Beaupre standing near the console, and she gave him a small nod. "What do you need me to do?" Raymond asked. "Stand next to me," Osei said. The demonstration lasted 40 minutes. Osei presented the Elias system. He explained the concurrent management protocol. He walked the board through the technical correction. And when a board member, a grey-haired woman named Dr. Hélène Trottier, Deputy Director of Health Services for the region, asked how the error had been identified given that the software team had been working on the system for 3 months without finding it, Dr. Osei said, "It was identified by Dr. Raymond Sear, our facilities maintenance specialist and former trauma surgeon. He co-authored the ATLS concurrent management guidelines that the system had failed to incorporate. He identified the error in under 3 minutes." Dr. Trottier looked at Raymond. She looked at his coveralls. She looked at his name tag. The demonstration proceeded. Alias ran the dual presentation scenario without error, yielding correctly to physician input on the cardiac complication, arriving at the favourable outcome. At the end, the board member who had been most sceptical, a compact, quiet man who had not said a word throughout the presentation and whose name Raymond did not know, looked at the outcome summary on the screen and then looked at Raymond and said, "You were at Sunnybrook?" "Yes," Raymond said. "I was a resident there in '94, the man said. "My surgical supervisor referenced a paper on asymmetric trauma triage that I never forgot. I read it 3 times in my first year." He paused, Sear. Raymond looked at him. The man said nothing else, but he made a note on the paper in front of him. The funding was approved. Not tentatively, not conditionally. Dr. Trottier announced it at the end of the session. Full continuation of the Elias program, pending the protocol rebuild that Morel had committed to delivering within 90 days. The room, which was not a room given to displays of emotion, allowed itself a brief moment of visible relief. Raymond did not stay for it. He was already at the door. Dr. Beaupre caught him in the corridor. She had clearly moved fast to get ahead of him, and she was slightly out of breath, and she had the slightly flustered expression of a person who has rehearsed something and then abandoned the rehearsal. She said, "Don't know what to." She stopped. She said, Raymond looked at her. She was 41 years old, and she had given a decade to building something she believed in, and today she had come very close to watching it end, and he could see all of that in her face clearly. "The system is going to save people," he said simply. "That's what it's for. Make sure they fix it properly. Not just the patch, the whole rebuild, every protocol. Get Morel to filter every training data set by guideline year. He'll do it if you stay on him." "I will," she said. He nodded. He started to turn. "Dr. Sear," she said. He stopped. "The 12 rural clinics," she said, "the overnight triage coverage. That's what Alias is for, ultimately. There are communities 300 kilometers from the nearest trauma surgeon that are going to get better outcomes because of what you did today." Raymond was quiet for a moment. He thought about a tent in Kandahar, a flashlight, a pair of hands that hadn't started shaking yet. "Good," he said, and walked away down the corridor. Dr. Osei found him 20 minutes later in the East Wing, replacing the last of the fluorescent tubes on his list. He stood at the base of Raymond's ladder and looked up at him. "I want to offer you a position," Osei said. "Medical advisor, consulting on the Alias rebuild, formally, with compensation that reflects your actual background." Raymond seated the bulb. He came down the ladder. "I'll think about it," he said. Osei nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Raymond folded his ladder. He looked at Osei. "The override lock," he said. "The one that was blocking physician input. Make sure that's not just patched out, make sure it's reconceived. The lock was there for a reason. Someone made a decision that physicians shouldn't be able to override the system in certain scenarios, and that decision made sense to someone at some point. Find out why, and make sure when you rebuild you understand the reasoning. Don't just remove the thing, understand it." Osei was quiet for a moment. "That's better advice than I've gotten from anyone in 6 months, he said. Raymond shrugged. "It's not complicated. It's just that machines are very good at being certain, and certainty is the thing that kills you when you're wrong." He picked up his ladder. He picked up the dead bulbs. He started down the corridor. That evening, he drove home through country roads that were just beginning to go gold at the edges, the particular September gold of southern Ontario in the late afternoon, a colour that has no equivalent anywhere, and that Raymond had missed for 20 years without knowing what he was missing. His daughter was making dinner. His grandson was in the backyard, 6 years old, deeply engaged with something in the grass that required his complete concentration. Raymond sat on the back step. His grandson came over and leaned against his knee without saying anything, the way small children do when they have decided you are safe. Raymond put his hand on the boy's head. His hands were not steady. They had not been steady for 11 years. But they still knew how to be gentle. Inside, his daughter called them for dinner, and Raymond stood up slowly, and his grandson ran ahead, and the evening was ordinary in every way, which was the only thing Raymond had ever wanted from evenings. That night, after dinner, after his grandson was in bed, Raymond sat at the kitchen table and opened the email from Dr. Osei. It was 3 sentences. The board confirmed full funding. Dr. Beaupre is putting together the rebuild team. Your name is on the list if you're willing. Raymond sat there for a while. He read it again. He thought about those 12 communities 300 kilometers from anywhere. He thought about a system that was learning to know the edge of what it knew. He typed back, "I'll be in early. I still have 3 fixtures in the south wing that need replacing." He sent it. He closed the laptop. He washed his cup. He turned off the kitchen light. Outside, the September dark was full of crickets, and it sounded, in the ordinary way of things, like enough.